Hello and welcome to the Hard Tech Podcast. Joining me today is Roger Pecina, CEO of eVTOLs Corporation, a creator of internet-connected DFR networks for first responders and public safety. DFR stands for Drones as First Responders. Roger, it's great to have you here today.
Thank you for having me, Daniel.
One of the earliest cases of drones being used as first responders occurred in 2018. The Chula Vista Police Department in Southern California started sending out drones whenever 911 calls came in to assess what kind of human police response is necessary. What does the current state and near future of DFRs? What does it look like?
Yeah, Chula Vista, they were a pioneer in using drone as a first responder. They're the first police station, I believe, in the country that was actually sending a drone to respond to 911 calls. What they realized early on is that by sending a robot to these calls early on, you can actually save a lot of resources from the city because oftentimes you only have to send a drone to these calls to be able to respond to them correctly. And also, like, there are situations where by having eyes on the scene really quickly, you know whether or not you need to send either more police or EMS or fire. And yeah, in the sense that was a pilot and it was a few years ago, but a lot of police stations nowadays are looking at implementing something like that, but in a grander scale. Where potentially you can actually have drones that live in their environment in base stations and whatnot. Chula Vista, I believe, was actually sending drones directly from the police station to these calls.
So Chula Vista pioneered this, and we have a bunch of police departments using technology, but is this likely to be adopted more in the future? Is it something that is getting traction?
It certainly is. Right now, I really believe that we're moving to a new era in drone as a first responder. Drones were used by police stations, fire, EMS extensively for the beginning of the industry. I really believe that the drone industry kicked off with the Phantom 1 when it was released in January of 2013. And since then, there have been multiple police stations and fire departments and EMS services across the nation that have been using drones, but for the most part, they're really human intensive, where you'll bring the drone with you in your vehicle and whatnot. And there are companies now across the U.S. that are trying to actually do drone as a first responder, but in a network system that lives in the city, where drones are positioned strategically around town to be able to respond to these calls very quickly within 3 minutes and whatnot. And that's what we're trying to build at Eve.
Nice. You said it all kicked off with the Phantom 1. Is that DJI?
DJI, yeah.
DJI, yeah.
So DJI, they're a company out of Shenzhen, China, and they're the market leader in consumer and enterprise drones. Last I checked, I think they have a private valuation of about like $15 billion. And they've been around for a little bit over 10 years, but they pretty much pioneered what it is to be like a consumer enterprise drone, and their first out-of-the-box solution that worked without needing to have an engineering degree or whatnot was the Phantom 1, which was released in January of 2013.
So would you say DJI is like the Apple of drones, something like that?
Absolutely. DJI, they're like a crown jewel. Their technology is great. They've been in the industry for a very long time. Their product experience is fantastic. They're vertically integrated in such a sense that they develop all of their own hardware, their own batteries, their own motors, propellers, etc. They're very early in the industry too. They're pretty much the first drone company to be able to enter the consumer drone market, where an everyday person could actually buy a drone and use it without necessarily having to have a lot of expertise in the topic.
Do you think their ability to get in so early was because it took advantage of where most of electronics manufacturing is done, Shenzhen? It's been in Shenzhen?
Absolutely. So DJI Global was started by a gentleman by the name of Frank Wang, and he started the company in his dorm room when he was a college student, and back then, DJI really started with flight controllers, which is like the brain of the vehicle that helps keep it like, flying and whatnot. And their first consumer product was the Phantom. And it's funny though, because like one of my previous employers, my boss, was Colin Gwen, who was the founder of DJI North America, which was their first office in the US. And the way Colin says it, Colin ran into Frank at a trade show, and he talked Frank into building eventually what became the Phantom 1. And long story short, they launched it, I think it was in B&H Photo, the website. And it was a really small release. It was probably a handful, 5, 10 drones. They sold out in less than a day.
Wow.
They sold out really quickly. And they ended up asking for more. And I believe they sent like something like a dozen or 2 dozen for the next batch, which was the following week. And they sold out in an hour. And then after that, the way Colin says it is he got a phone call from them, and they asked, how much can you fit in a shipping container? And a lot of people say that that's how the drone industry got kicked off. And before we knew it, that company went from a few million in revenue the previous year to 150 million in revenue in about a year and a half after the Phantom released. And nowadays they have something like 70% market share in North America. About 3 out of every 4 drones sold here is a DJI.
3 out of every 4?
Yeah.
That's a monopoly.
It's like they're really good.
Yeah. Wow. Okay, I'm glad we had that discussion because it shows how you were at the forefront of, working with a company that is basically one of the first to get this started, and now you're working on technology that is a little bit more advanced.
Yes.
So your former boss founded DJI North America, and then you have an extensive background in vehicle technology.
Yeah.
Just walk me through that a little bit.
Yeah, so my undergraduate degree was in mechanical engineering. I studied at one of the University of Texas branches in South Texas. About like 11, 12 years ago, I built my College of Engineering's first drone as my senior design project. So I'd been in the industry for a while. Back when I was working on drones at the beginning, like, people thought I was like working on something that was going to go to Afghanistan, and I was like, no, they're these little like multi-rotor things that carry a camera or can carry a package or whatnot. And yeah, so the bug bit me really early, and to be completely honest, like I was really taken by the technology in the sense that like I saw it as a way that eventually maybe one day you could build like flying cars out of that tech. So that really got me very interested. So I wanted to learn more about it.
Yeah. It's funny how sometimes when you dream about the future, you think you are having delusions of grandeur until it actually happens, right?
Absolutely.
And we're going to get into the subject of flying cars, in this discussion.
Yeah.
But that's good. That's great. So actually, let's talk about it right now.
Yeah.
Recently, a company called Aleph Aeronautics, right, received limited FAA approval for an eVTOL car. So eVTOL is electric vertical takeoff and landing, right?
Yeah.
That's what it is. Okay, so an eVTOL car. You can now pre-order a flying car for $300,000. Wow. A flying car with a down payment of just $150. So again, just paint the picture of the current and future landscape of eVTOLs in general. So just flying cars, drones, planes, and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's like different people in the industry right now that have very different visions of where this is going. I've met quite a few founders of flying car companies. There's actually another startup at JJ Pickle Research Campus, which is currently where our office is.
As in UT?
As in UT, JJ Pickle Research Campus, yeah. And we actually do a lot of testing in the soccer field with another startup company that they have a flying car, and they're called Lift Aircraft in Hexa. And yeah, so in a sense, like one of the reasons why I really think that drones are important, especially drones as a first responder and even drone delivery, is it's almost like the first step to get flying cars into the market. And this is my outlook, how I think it's going to happen, but I really think that they're going to develop these air traffic systems that are going to manage whether Google or Amazon can deliver that package, or that burrito from Chipotle or whatnot to your front door. And that air traffic management system is going to be the blueprint for eventually what will be like a flying car network system that you can leave your house and get in your vehicle and be on the other side of town in like 5 minutes. But I really think that it needs to happen in stages. Flying car technology is really disruptive. It's a paradigm change. When you think about it, humans, we've been traveling in 2 dimensions for like nearly all of civilization. First you're walking, then you're on a horse, then you're on a buggy, then you're on an automobile, but nonetheless you're still traveling in an XY plane. And the whole flying car thing like adds that 3rd dimension. So you can actually like fly over traffic, you can, you know, do all these different things. But for it to work, like I said, it's baby steps, just because they need to plan how to do it safely. You can't necessarily have like a bad actor that's flying a car that may crash into a building or something. So it's very likely going to be very autonomous. I really don't believe people who have flying cars will be able to actually fly them inside of like in an urban environment. Maybe like in a rural area, they'll be able to give that control to you. But yeah, no, like multiple companies around the world are trying to do the different models. I'm a big believer that there has to be a driving component to this technology as well. So some flying car concepts are just eVTOLs, and what that means, like you said, electric vertical takeoff and landing. They're like electric helicopters, but they can't necessarily drive you down the street. And there are companies out there that are developing hybrid vehicles that have the ability to drive and fly. And I really feel like those are going to be the ones that are going to be the real winners in this marketplace, because if you're trying to get to a consumer, like build the people's flying car, like the Ford Model T was the people's automobile like 100 years ago. There really has to be that transition where people still have the ability to drive their car maybe down the street. But if you really need to travel far and you want to beat traffic, then you can turn it into like, you know, it's flying mode and you can make it to the other side of town. But like I said, like things like regulatory environment, like, you know, rules and laws and all these things need to be worked out. But I genuinely believe by the year 2040, maybe the latest 2045, you'll see flying cars in the skies over America. Like, I think it's going to be one of those things we see in our lifetime for sure.
The one thing I'm thinking about right now is there's some countries and some states within the U.S. that are pushing for all electric cars by a certain time, right?
Yeah.
And in the early days, it used to be a lot of skepticism about electric cars, and people were like, no, this is never going to take It's never going to take off.
Right.
No one is ever going to drive an electric car, or only a few people are going to drive it. But now, they are taking over. So that brings me to a point where you said something about they might only be allowed in remote areas.
Yeah.
But if we get to a point where eVTOLs become so good and so widely adopted, are we going to see government regulations in some cities, some states, some countries where they're like, okay, now if you're not driving a 3-dimensional car, then you got to get out or something like that? You think so?
There's definitely going to be an inflection point for sure. I mean, there was a day, probably maybe, I don't know, anywhere between 50 to 100 years ago, where the last person who had a horse that was like riding their horse into town was told, hey, you can't ride that horse anymore.
Yeah,
we live
exactly.
in the age of the automobile now. The horse is a previous age. There will be a point when the market adoption passes 51%, and more than half of America has a flying car, like, you know, that they use to commute to work or, you know, whatever, like leisurely travel and whatnot. And I think that's when that's going to happen, where eventually there'll be a regulation that say, if you're powering, you know, your petrol car from the 1990s or whenever, like, or even your electric car that doesn't have the ability to fly, it's like, hey, it's time to move to, like, they'll probably do like a thing where they'll give a certain date, like they did with digital television, where like we're moving from this platform to this platform, you have till this day to jump. And but technological progress, like, you know, technology is always evolving, civilization's always growing, things are always changing. One thing that we know for sure is things aren't going to stay the same. They're going to change in the future.
Yeah, I'm a firm believer in change being driven by the need to solve a problem.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, that's why we develop as engineers. That's why we develop technologies, right?
Absolutely.
It's to solve a certain problem, satisfy a certain need, things like that. So, if we have increased population, right, increase in population, or increased density in our cities, then I can see a situation in which this becomes very, very well. And just like electric cars, right? When Tesla first started, the cars used to be really expensive. Right? So if you have people who can afford three-dimensional cars and want to just get over traffic, get somewhere faster, and they all decide to adopt the technology, then it would just I'm almost saying this like the way electric cars, like the trend with electric cars, I'm almost seeing that with this in the future, especially since many of the companies developing the concept of flying cars are actually starting from where cars are. So electric cars, the flying cars are electric powered, right?
Yeah.
Most of them, or maybe even all of them. I don't know. I don't know anyone that is not electric powered right now. Yeah. And they're starting from that base, and they're like, this is the next level.
Yeah.
Right? So that'll be very interesting to see. Okay. Moving away from DJI and LF Electronics and flying cars, let's talk about e-vehicles a bit more, about what you're working on. So you have, your technology is called QROW?
Yes. So the
right.
QROW is it's right here. It's a drone as a first responder.
Yeah.
It actually originally came out of a DoD hackathon that me and my co-founder we won back in November of 2021, I believe, and it was called National Security Innovation Network Hackathon Power Play, and that was like we floated the idea for a concept of a drone that lived in the environment, that it could perch and land on building rooftops, and it could also grasp a power line to charge its battery. And that was the original concept. And that one was called Camera Reconnaissance on Wire, but that's CROW, QROW. And then later, as the product evolved over the last couple of years, we renamed it with a Q because it turned into a quadrotor, and then we called it Quadrotor Reconnaissance on Wings because we actually also got this really amazing partnership with Army Research Laboratories for some technology that they developed out of the University of Maryland called Quadrotor Biplane. And so eventually the QROW will have these wings on it. So we called it QROW now, and that's like what the name is at the moment.
Nice. So it's an eVTOL that can live in environments that it surveils, right?
Yes, correct.
Nice. Okay, before we get back into the concept of a drone living in its environment, let me go back to eVTOLs real quick. So eVTOL tail-seater drones, like your wonderful drone here with the lights, police lights and everything. Yeah. How do they operate from a general engineering standpoint? Okay. How does an eVTOL operate, like take off, land, and things like that?
Yeah. So this one right here, it's an electric vertical takeoff and landing drone, and it's a multi-rotor. So what that means is it has multiple rotors, and this one's specifically called a quadcopter or a quadrotor, and it's actually the most popular airframe in the drone market right now, where you basically have an X frame or a plus frame, and you have 4 motors and 4 propellers. And in a nutshell, the way it flies is something called propeller differential thrust, and what that means is the speed at which each motor is going will determine whether it's hovering like level, whether it's pitching forward and flying forward, or rolling left, right, or even yawing. And all that is done through the sensors on the drone, and they can actually measure the inertia of the drone and the acceleration, and also the gyroscope, and knows whether or not it's level. So it gives power to each motors, and depending on how much power it gives will determine whether the drone is moving forward or moving backwards or climbing higher or even rotating. And that's some of the things that really fascinated me by the drone industry. So I'm a mechanical engineer, so we're used to like mechanical systems and like, a moving shaft or like a moving like linkage that will move like an aileron or a flap. Drones have none of that. It's all in the software, like at least multi-rotor drones, and that was really fascinating to me because it means the mechanical frame is very simple, and all of the complexity gets shifted onto the code and like its ability to move left and right and all those things, and be able to measure where it is, relative to its environment.
So fantastic. I have a slightly deeper question, right? Engineering question about this. So in the early days, when aeroplanes were invented, right, we didn't have powerful small batteries that you could just use to have liftoff and landing pretty much solely on the power of a battery, right? You had to rely on nature in a sense, the concepts of lift, airflow, drag, things like that to allow the plane take off and land. Is there any of that with drones, or is it just purely have a battery pack in there, take off, land?
They definitely have wing drones that are gliders. They're drones that are like airships and balloons that, basically float, like, using like Archimedes' principle with like a light gas or whatnot. They do have there's some that can be without electricity, and then there's some that actually do have power. Maybe they have a propeller to be able to like change its direction and whatnot. But in terms of them being like winged, there are a lot of winged drones, and just being able to like add an airfoil to like the vehicle extends its like flight time. So like for example, like the Google delivery drone, the wing drone, it is an eVTOL, but it also has a very large airfoil that allows it to travel much further because it has that. Zipline, which is another drone delivery company, they too have a solution that has a long airfoil that allows the drone to be able to extend its range. So to answer your question, there are definitely principles of lift and drag and things, depending on what type of vehicle you're building.
So basically, if you don't adopt fundamental principles of flight, then you're going to have a pretty inefficient drone.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, let's get back to drones living in the environment. They surveil, right? What are the benefits, just generally speaking, of having a drone live in the environment it surveils?
So the way that they did it at Chula Vista was they had drones that would leave the police station, and then they would go, and then they would come back. That does give you a certain limited radius of what you can actually operate in based on the flight time of the drone. It arrives, it idles, and then it needs to come back to swap out its battery. Where the industry is moving towards and what we're doing at Eve is we're basically developing the network as well. And when I say that is we have stations that are in the environment, and we call them crow nests because the drone is called the crow. It's its nest, crow nest. Our station is designed to basically, it has a small computer on it. It reports its GPS location. It has some DC charging electronics as well, so when the drone docks, it can charge the drone's battery. By actually positioning the stations in an environment, you can actually strategically put them in areas, for example, where there is crime, or areas where there might be a risk of fire, or areas where there's already been some data that's shown that it's more prone for traffic accidents or whatnot, and you need to send EMS services there relatively quickly. So when we built the drone, we really wanted to extend its ability to stay in the environment, because like I said, the first 10 years of the industry were all about, you have a drone, you have a human pilot, the human pilot's always watching the drone, and then whenever the battery runs low, they bring the drone back to them, and then they pull out the battery and they put in a new fully charged battery. We really wanted the interaction that our clients and customers have with our drones to be very behind a window, almost like a screen, in that the drone is almost like a robot that lives in its environment by itself, that maybe the actual pilot and the person that's flying the drone won't actually interact with the physical robot for weeks or months on end. And the idea is that you're able to extend the value, and also have the drone be able to stay out there longer by having infrastructure positioned there for the drones to actually live. So in a sense, the crow nest is kind of think of it like, a bird's little water pond where it goes back to drink water, to refresh itself, to be able to stay alive and stay out there. And that was really the vision for the product. Like we wanted to really like move the technology a little bit forward by having that. And we aren't the only company that's doing that. Like a lot of the drone network companies, even the drone delivery companies, they have the same thing where they have a station, they have a drone and whatnot. And I really think that's the way to go. And also something that's really important as well, Daniel, is that for like the start now, like a lot of internet applications are being built using drones, which wasn't really the case at the beginning. The beginning was very like radio intensive, like long range Wi-Fi and whatnot. But the ability to communicate to a cloud and have that send a signal directly to the drone, and you could be in Austin flying a drone in Houston, or be in New York flying a drone in Dallas. Like that is something that's starting to happen now, and I really think that's very powerful too.
Nice. We can get into like subject of like what that really entails in terms of, but I'm thinking about what you said about areas where there's crime.
Yeah.
Right. Or places that, like, you will see speed signs, for example, in places where police have noticed that there's a lot of racing.
Yeah.
Or, people speed all the time. So I'm thinking areas where you have a lot of crime, instead of having just police cars and police presence all the time there, people just get nervy and nervous, and everything just seems tense. If you have a bunch of drones, right, drones like this, just hidden somewhere, it's probably better because they can still respond just as quickly, right?
Yeah.
So that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we will get into the subject of predictive public safety or something like that, very soon in this podcast. But right now, the concept of DFR, is it limited by, and again, DFR drones as first responders, is it limited by the number of drones that can be allowed to fly at any given time by the FAA? Is there some kind of restriction?
So a lot of the regulations for what we're doing are relatively new. To be able to operate a drone beyond line of sight, you need something called the Beyond Visual Line of Sight waiver. And there's also different classifications of different drones depending on its size, weight, and also like the specific sensors and like, safety features that the drone has designed into it. In a sense, I believe that the FAA has definitely improved its like vision of the future of what it thinks America's like the skies over America are going to look like for both drones and things like air taxis and flying cars, which is great because for a while that was the limiting factor. The technology has been ready for a while. It was really taking a moment to like responsibly be able to create legislation that would allow these like flying robots to be able to be over the skies of America responsibly. So yeah, in a sense, like in the last year or two, I'm sure you guys have seen drone light shows and whatnot.
Yeah.
To be able to operate those light shows, you need something called a multi-drone use waiver. That means one pilot can be flying multiple drones at once, and that's another kind of waiver that's relatively new. So, like I said, yeah, the FAA has definitely been creating new laws to be able to allow what we're doing to be possible.
So there's not a lot of restriction on what you can do right now.
I mean, there are certain restrictions. You do need to apply for these waivers and whatnot. Like you need to know what to put in these applications. But they are awarding these waivers now, which they weren't like years ago.
They are approving them?
They are approving them,
okay.
Yes,
So you need to apply, and you're typically fine when you apply.
Yeah.
Okay. I was going to say that if you have like a base station, and you have all your drones flying from there to, say you were a public safety department, like a police department or fire or something like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you always had to deploy your drones from your fire station every single time there's a fire.
Right.
Then it's a lot more disruptive than if you place the drones in areas where, crime or fires or things like that were likely to occur more.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking it's a lot easier to get approval for for things like that than if you had a central station deploying them from. Do you think that's an issue or not?
Yeah, I do believe that the centralized hub is not the way forward. In part because, like I said earlier, like you have like a limited radius of what you can cover if you're only allowed to launch from one location. So one of the things that we want to do is, believe it or not, like a lot of police stations, like APD, they actually have permission to be able to put equipment on a lot of the rooftops in downtown Austin. And they have that for reasons like, for example, there could be a shooting, or like, they need to get a sniper or SWAT on top of a rooftop, and they can't be on the phone with the building manager asking permission or whatnot. They need to be up there like ASAP. So they have these basically permission to be able to put equipment and whatnot across a lot of these buildings. So one of the ideas is that we put these stations on rooftops, like, in urban environments, not just in Austin, but in other cities as well.
Yeah.
And by doing that, you can extend the range of where you can actually cover. Think of them almost like cell phone towers. Like you can have like a cell phone tower just in one location, but only people around that tower have the internet. And like maybe like a few miles down, that person's in a black spot or whatnot. But yeah, no. In a sense, I really think the idea that you have these stations spread across an area is a lot more of a value add, and you can get to the destination much more quickly. Like you can tell people that, we respond to 911 calls in 2 to 3 minutes, because you can't, because you're spread over a wide area.
Yeah.
Versus being in one central point and be like, we respond, depending on how close you are, 3 minutes, 5 minutes, but we respond pretty quickly, kind of deal. But yeah.
Yeah. Wow. I actually like this overall concept of public safety with hidden drones and being able to respond to situations better, surveil the area. Really know what's happening, and that's the future, and hopefully we can keep our cities safer.
It is.
Yeah, but moving away from public safety, and I'm sure when you started Eve vehicles, you probably got some interest from non-public safety related entities, right? In terms of early adopters, what type of customers are you seeing that have been showing you some interest?
Yeah, so we've also thought of doing private security. We've spoken to a few oil and gas clients that were potentially interested in replacing their security guard that drives the fence line with just like a drone that does that patrol. So refineries, pipelines are a customer that we've spoken with, and we have some early interest there as well. We've also talked to a few Texas ranchers. In fact, we had an alpha drone at a ranch in South Texas around Edinburgh with one of our early customers. And yeah, so there's a lot of applications for like drone network systems with like cameras and whatnot. But we wanted to do public safety in part because there's a big demand. There's a big public safety labor shortage occurring right now nationwide. A lot of police academies aren't getting applicants. A lot of people aren't going into like fire departments to become firefighters, and paramedics to become like emergency service providers. So in a sense, there is like a labor shortage. So we wanted to use like some form of automation with robotics to be able to help let these operations operate more efficiently, because it's crazy to think about, but like public safety, like phone call operations, it really hasn't like experienced a lot of innovation in the last like 80 years. Like, okay, so like you close your eyes and you're like, okay, 100 years ago in the 1920s, like the phones had been around for what, like maybe a quarter century since like Bell had to like, popularize them. So you had someone pick up their phone, they called 911, police picked up, they was like, how can I help you? And that interaction is like the same today, except with the cell phone. And like, you think they would have developed like a mobile app or something where like, you call 911 and like you have a video stream going and you can see the cop, and the person calling 911 can show the cop what's going on, or it's still just voice. And so like the ability to use a robot to be able to have eyes on scene really quickly I think is a big value add. And also just here in Austin, for example, during peak 911 call volume hour, like during like 5 to like 9 when it gets pretty bad, you can be on hold for like 5 to 10 minutes. Like I've been on hold once when I was calling 911 for 7 minutes, and for them to send help, sometimes it can be quick. Like if you heard gunshots or something, they'll be there relatively quickly, like in 10 minutes.
Yeah.
But if it's something like a petty crime, like maybe your TV or your house was broken into and they stole your TV or they stole something, your laptop, sometimes they won't follow up for months. They'll be like, oh, we'll send a police officer next month on said date or whatnot. So like the reason why is because they just don't have enough people to be able to follow up on everything. And in part because they're not able to operate like super efficiently with like, with the officers they have. I know one of our team members, our VP of strategic partnerships, he was an Austin cop for 26 years. He was on the force for that long. And he was telling us when he joined the company last year that before the pandemic, Austin Police Academy was getting 1,000 applicants every month for people who wanted to be a cop. At the end of last year, in December, they got 40.
What?
Yeah. And it's getting worse, like in the sense, so like
40.
There's less cops in the pipeline being trained, less and less police officers. Like crime is going to get worse before it gets better, and like for that reason, like we need like new solutions that like solve this big problem.
Wow. Yeah, I didn't know the problem was that bad. From 1,000 a month to 40.
Yep.
Yeah,
with the whole defund police movement and all these other things, like it got pretty bad.
But thinking about shrinkage, there are some industries like warehousing maybe, and some other spaces where technologies had to be developed, like robots, for example, to basically move stuff around warehouses, to make up for the loss of workers and lack of interest of people in working in that environment, for example, right?
Right.
Is this what's likely to happen? Because you've seen movies where in the future, police officers are just like basically. There are hardly any police officers, and most of the surveilling is done with like technology, like drones and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Is that what's going to happen here eventually, where we will no longer be worried about the lack of applications because you don't need a lot of police officers anyway with the technology that you are developing, for example.
Yeah, I really believe that this is like square one to like a very large like field where like. Right now, we're replying to 911 calls. That's the first application of the QROW system. Where like 911 comes in, you're like, okay, let's send a drone and see what's going on there. But like, there's gonna be a day where like the QROW drone will eventually do patrol, where it's like flying up and down like Lamar or on Mopac, and the QROW drone is gonna be what's giving out speeding tickets. And the reason why,
Excuse me,
the reason why I say that is because like humans like. We're meant to do hard stuff, like in the sense that like we problem solve. We have these brains, like, we look at situations and we think like measuring the velocity of a vehicle going down a straight line and being able to be like, yo, this is going like 15 miles over the limit. Let's get a shot of the license plate, send the ticket. You don't need a human to do that. A robot can do that. The human needs to be solving a crime that requires like detective work and like, it's actually like requires their like full attention. And, so, I believe there's going to be other applications of QROW that eventually it's going to be the QROW Patrol, like, or this and that. And that's going to be really driven by, like, the software on the drone and the sensors on the drone, by the way. So, like, right now, like I said, we have a very early application of what we want to do, but the roadmap is long. And there's going to be situations where, like, the QROW, and I genuinely believe this, that the QROW is going to respond to 911 calls, and it's going to be saving people's lives. Like, there's going to be de-escalations that occur. Maybe, like, the QROW got there on the 911 call within 3 minutes, and they were able to spot the person kidnapping a child or someone, and they were able to follow that kidnapper, versus someone calling in that call saying, oh, my God, this is happening, and the cop shows up 30 minutes later, and the person's gone. Like, So, like, being able to get a public safety response on scene really quickly is going to be incredibly very useful, and it's going to be a net positive on the world. I really believe that.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, and there are a lot of police officers, obviously, who are on traffic duty, who, complain about not doing like more challenging tasks. And now you can do it. It's almost like what AI is doing to many industries, where it's allowing for people to stop doing mundane tasks or the easy tasks and actually begin to think and innovate beyond what they normally would have spent their time doing.
Absolutely.
Which brings me to the question of AI.
Yeah.
Right. Right. So you're building the QROW. You're deploying the QROW. You also have a drone network because you're allowing drones nest or live in environments where that is surveilled.
Yeah.
So obviously it's a network. Do you see a future in which artificial intelligence is involved with this network? It is the deployment of drones, the communication with each other, and the gathering of data. So how would all these different activities be impacted by artificial intelligence, if at all?
Yeah. So AI. I use ChatGPT 4 quite a bit. So I'm not a software guy in the sense that I'm mostly like mechanical engineer. I do like CAD design work and everything, but I'll give you my thoughts on AI. I really believe right now with what the QROW is doing, we are doing some computer vision with recognition and whatnot. The drone can recognize a person and can spot them and keep them like in lock, or like recognize a car and look at the license plate and things like that. But as the models get more like the neural nets and get more sophisticated on the drone, there's going to be a lot more thinking and things that it can do. And so every drone, every QROW right now has an NVIDIA Jetson Orin as its companion computer. That
so you have the GPU and all that stuff.
Yeah. So think of so a lot of drones have two things. They'll have the flight computer, that all the flight computer does is make sure the drone is flying, it's level. When you send it a command to move forward, it does that. It manages all the power through the system and whatnot. And then you have the companion computer. And the companion computer you can attach cameras to. You can run like computer models and do all these other things. And it's almost like the left brain and the right brain of the drone, if you will. Mm-hmm. And yeah, so we're very early because obviously our team isn't really big. We're 6 full-time employees, and then we have another 6 interns. So the team as a whole is like a dozen at Eve. And nearly all of us were all like an engineering background, except for the business development people, which is about 3 of us. But yeah, no, there's a lot of development ahead of us that we're going to do on the QROW. And like I said, different applications will pop up and we'll be able to solve more complex problems as we write more software for it.
Yeah.
But like I said, the QROW is at iPhone version 1. We're not at 10 yet, but we'll get there eventually.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure you've thought about it. You've thought about AI, and I think your technology, your industry is adjacent to AI. It's gonna get affected by AI. And I want to even ask you a deeper question, or maybe a ridiculous question. We'll see how that goes. Many experts in the AI space have predicted that we'll approach AGI. Mm-hmm. That's artificial general intelligence within a few years, with AI suppressing human intelligence. Yeah. Right. So within that time period, right? Okay. So now speaking about the QROW and drones as first responders, technologies like that. Yeah. What's the likelihood that we can predict public safety events before they happen, just like in the Minority Report? The movie by Tom Cruise, right?
Yeah.
Movie with Tom Cruise, sorry.
Yeah.
Now, I mean, you're the CEO of a major tech company. I'm sure you thought about some of these things, no?
We have. So there's a lot of startups in Austin. It's great. It's a great city to live in if you're building a tech company for sure. Uh-huh. I've encountered a lot of entrepreneurs, and one of them is a founder of a company called Loretta.io. And they've actually they work with the Department of Homeland Security, and they have a few airports where they have this technology. But computer vision, from what I understand, there's the way that you identify things and you track things. You're oh, that's a human. Let me follow it and keep it in my camera's line of sight. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of companies that do a lot of computer vision tracking and recognition and whatnot, and they have really good models that they've built on that. What this company has done, though, and why we're interested and we're talking with him as well, the CEO's name is Galvin, and so he's developed a model where not only does it track, and this is why they're starting to use it in airports, it can kind of infer what a person is doing. And the way it does that is not only is it looking at the person, it's looking at what the person is doing, maybe the way they're walking, what they're walking into like a convenience store. So like think about like him tracking an individual in an airport, and then the person walks into like an airport bakery. Like the algorithm will infer, that person might actually walk out of that bakery with a baked good. And like that's like an early level of like where you're seeing a situation in the AI is like a person goes into a building to like, McDonald's, they'll probably walk out with a burger or some chicken nuggets or some fries, like, So that's good and bad because like there could be like misconstructions as well, where maybe the AI is like, oh, that's a bad actor, but that person's just like a regular person going about their everyday life. I do believe over time it'll be more accurate, but I also feel that's a little dangerous. There's always going to have to be a human involved with that because like we can't have like AI saying, oh, that person, could have done X, Y, Z, and maybe that model was wrong, like, and you can incriminate someone or whatnot based on what like a computer model like saw. But I do believe it's going to be something that helps a lot in the process, and I do believe that we will eventually use it on the QROW as well, where maybe you'll see someone on 6th Street and you see them reaching for their pocket, and like you had recognized that person maybe earlier down the street, you thought you saw a gun or something like that, where one drone will talk to another drone that's like, hey, that person's a little suspicious. I think they might have been carrying a firearm. And then the second drone sees that person's actually reaching for it. Yeah. It's like, oh my God, something's about to happen. I really believe that that's very close. Like we can actually be there by like the year 2030 with drones, like in that sense, yeah.
So it's basically finding that balance between privacy and objective reality in terms of the way people actually behave then.
Yeah.
Like you don't want to invade privacy. You also don't want to profile people unnecessarily.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. And we've talked to police stations about the QROW and the drone as a first responder and how they'll be used. They purposely were very clear that the QROW and the drone as a first responder will be doing overt operations. And what they mean by that is like there's like police bells and whistles on this drone. Like when the drone is coming, you will know. Like a cop is coming, sirens and whatnot. Like they don't want covert operations. Like the idea that you're walking down Lamar and all of a sudden you feel like a chill and you look over your shoulder and you see like on the building rooftop there's like this robot with a red eye just looking at you and you're like, whoa, okay, that's really creepy. It's not going to be like that. Like you will know when a drone as a first responder arrives. It'll make noise. Like it'll be like, hey, police presence is here. Like the idea is not to hide. Like we want people to know. We want people to feel safe. Like, in a sense, like you should feel that you're like, hey, there's a cop on scene already, although it's a robot cop. But in a sense, like the presence will be known and it's not going to be hidden, like in a sense.
Yeah. I'm thinking more along the lines. So if the Austin Police Department is thinking about it that way, then that's great. But I can give you a bunch of examples about how, for example, when data companies were misusing people's data without telling them.
Right.
And, you have phone companies being forced to create a back end to their systems. You have some cities installing like surveillance systems that if you're driving a certain car within a certain environment, then you get ticketed because that car pollutes the environment and things like that. Yeah. Like, I'm just thinking about not necessarily bad actors, but people going beyond what they're allowed to do in terms of invading privacy or controlling people in a sense, and the possibilities around this, and whether your industry, your space is beginning to think about those things in the future. Because like with every industry, with every technology system, there are always going to be bad actors. Yeah. Right. So that's really where the question is coming from. But I'm hoping that it's just one of those things that helps keep society safer with limited invasion of privacy, and in a way that is also fair to everybody involved, right? So, so that's, if it turns out that way, which I think it will, and then it will be great. And hopefully also we can see, you said the idea of the QROW is to start as drones as first responders, but it's it should vertically integrate properly into the whole eVTOL system, right? eVTOL space.
Yeah. So in a sense, in terms of it sharing the highways of the sky with Amazon's delivery drone, I mean, it's going to do that for sure. And
flying cars
and flying cars
and
as well.
planes and things like that.
Yeah. Like I really think the way when the dust settles and we're looking back, I think it's going to be something like between like 150 feet to like 500 feet. Those are going to be like the drones as a first responder, Amazon's delivery drone, zipline delivery drone. That's their airspace. And then like maybe from like 750 feet to like 1,000 feet, that's like the flying cars. That's people flying across like a town and whatnot. And eventually it's going to look a little bit like Fifth Element or something, like where there's like just like traffic left and right, people flying back and forth, and like robots on the bottom lanes, like flying cars on the top lanes. And I really believe it's going to be released like in stages. It's not going to be from one day to the next that, you know, they're like, oh, on September 1st, 2025 is when like all the delivery drones are going to start. No, it's going to be like, you'll see one here or there. The application starts getting more popular, but there will be an inflection point. And also, like, like a little caveat really quick. When I first met Colin Gwen, like my old boss,
the DJI
the
CEO?
DJI founder of North America and CEO. Yeah, he it was at Capital Factory, which is a technology incubator and accelerator here in town, in downtown Austin, in the Omni building. And it was on the 16th floor, and he was giving a talk. And I think the chair of the aerospace engineering department was with him as well, from UT. And they're talking about flying robots and whatnot. And I'll never forget, like, Colin said something that really like reverberated with me, where he was like, and this was like the year it was like 2019, and he was like, "Do you know how we know the drone industry hasn't arrived yet?" And everyone's like, "How?" And he's like, "Look out the window." And we were on the 16th floor. And he's like, "Where are the drones?" And there were none. So, like, you know, and it was so true.
That's a good line.
It was so true. And I was like, you know what, you're right. The drone industry has not arrived yet. Like, you know.
Yeah, that's wow. It's a very good picture right there. I actually started thinking about how, when you describe like the allowance in terms of, or maybe drones can fly 500 feet. You said to 1,000 feet. Maybe flying cars maybe fly higher than that. I don't know. Then planes, 20,000 feet to 30-something thousand feet.
Right.
It seems like the third dimension of transportation is a lot more complex than the existing dimensions.
It is.
Or will be a lot more complex.
It will be very complex, because you need to have every single vehicle in the sky talking to one another if you want to prevent accidents and whatnot. So the air traffic management system is going to have to be really good. Also, though, like, I think it's going to happen a lot more quickly. And the reason why is, like, for us to live in an automobile world, roads had to be built for automobiles. And sure, you can say, oh, but roads existed for horses and buggies, but they really didn't exist in between towns and outside of cities, and it was really bad. Like, the roads weren't really developed. So it costs a lot of capital infrastructure to build out the road network, not just in America, but, like, across the world. And yeah, so, like, the thing about the flying cars and the drones and everything, you're not, like, pouring concrete in the sky and be like, oh man, this is gonna be like a super highway, like 5 lanes, and you're writing code. So like a highway in the sky that's digital, where like a flying car knows it's there, like, you know, the people on the computer know it's there, but it's just lines of code saying that from South Austin to North Austin at 1,000 feet, like at this like GPS point and at this GPS endpoint, there's a road in the sky that vehicles travel through. And because it's like written in software, I feel like it can be done much more quickly. Like, and I feel that for that reason, when the inflection point happens, the growth is going to be like a hockey stick, because I don't believe it's going to require tremendous amount of capital intensive, like, you know, like projects to make it happen.
And I think I understand what you mean now by saying that it will have to be autonomous. Yeah. Because if they're going to speak to each other and they're going to have to be required to stay within a certain airspace or whatever, then you have to reduce human error.
Yes, reduce risk as well.
Reduce risk of collisions and whatever in the sky. That's not going to be pretty. Yeah. Wow. Okay, there's a lot here we've talked about today. I'm really rooting for for this for e-vehicles and
thank you.
and the space in general. It's very exciting. I want to see. Let's see 2-3 years from now and see that there are drones in the sky.
Yeah.
Right. you know, when we have this discussion again, we look outside the window like, yeah, something is happening out there now. Well, Roger, thanks for coming today.
Yeah.
I really appreciate it. Where can people find you if they want to reach out about the technology and things like that?
So we have our website, which is www.eve, like the one who bit the apple, vehicles.com. And you can shoot me an email as well. I usually respond same day for the most part. My email is just roger@evehicles.com. And we're on Instagram too and on Twitter. Just look for eVTOLs on the gram or on Twitter. And you can also follow us on LinkedIn as well. We're on LinkedIn too.
Yeah, so that's evevehicles.com?
Yes.
.com?
Yeah.
Okay, fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
Again, thanks. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for having me, Daniel.
Thanks for coming. It was so much fun. And it's got me thinking a lot about the future. And this has been another episode of the Hard Tech Podcast. I'll see you guys on the next one. Thank you. If you enjoyed this episode, please like and share the video. Also subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell so that you can stay up to date with the future of physical technologies relating to robotics, energy, healthcare, transportation, and more.